Hey, KU fans, welcome back to another episode of the KU Sports Hour here at KUsports.com with Benton Smith and Shane Jackson. I'm Matt Tate, and I keep introducing it, guys, like KU Sports Hour, and that's our podcast name. But COVID has forced us into these Zoom podcasts, which I think are cool. The audio's better. I think people like them. I think the option to see us getting fired up like this is probably giving people nightmares, but also some people might like it. But I don't want anyone to think that we think it's an hour. You know, the free version of this deal is like, 30, 40 minutes. So we try to fit it in there. But we'll get back to the flow of things as soon as that vaccine comes out, which I hear is any day now. So let's check into that as we go. But I have enjoyed doing it this way, and it's way better than those early days of COVID and the quarantining when we just all talked through my speakerphone here, and it sounded like a train wreck, quite literally. So we're still the KU Sports Hour. We give you a good 35, 36 minutes. And right now, maybe hopefully leave you wanting a little bit more, needing those final 24 minutes. But today we're going to talk almost all basketball. KU football's on a bye this week. Their third bye week of the season. I mean,
I love all these buys.
Yeah.
They're huge.
It's just weird, right? Like,
it's strange, yeah.
I mean, I think we've probably talked about this a little bit already, but it's probably great for this team. I mean, it gives them 3 weeks to develop young talent and not have to game plan for an opponent. And obviously they could use all the development and practice time they can get right now, especially missing spring and really most of fall camp. So I think that's probably something they've used to their advantage, but at the same time, just taking a break. I mean, if you get beat 62-9 at Oklahoma and your quarterback got sacked 9 times, that probably felt like 90, taking a week off is probably not the worst sounding thing ever, right?
Yeah, good timing for that. You know, allows Jalen Daniels to potentially recover too from all those bruises. And I mean, apparently it was just like a really bad bruise on his ankle that kind of is what he's dealing with right now, according to what Les Miles said earlier in the week. So, you know, we're assuming he'll be back for that Texas game on November 21st. I don't know. I don't know what you can do in a bye week to drastically improve the offense, and that's been the biggest issue all season. So I think you make a good point, though. These bye weeks might be huge just for like the younger guys who aren't actually playing a lot on Saturdays, right? Just to get them reps, because that might be one of the few benefits from this weird pandemic schedule.
Yeah, I think that's fair, Shane. What can you do offensively in a bye week? We both, and Benton has done it more than we have, but this week we both jumped in on the offensive line with some blogs of our own. And I mean, I think you can't hope for players to just improve in 4 days, right? I mean, that's kind of what the coaches have been saying all year. You know, these guys are going to get better, and they are. I mean, of course, that's the goal, and that's why you work. But I just don't think in season there's enough time to get better enough for it to make a difference. But what kinds of things could you see maybe benefiting them offensively, especially?
Yeah, that was the weird thing because, I mean, I don't think going into that Oklahoma game you were going to learn anything because Oklahoma was really good. KU was not. KU was young. It was like whatever happens, happens. And then the offensive line was so bad. Everybody was like, well, that was the story in week 1. Yeah. And now it's still the story. So how is it still this bad? So I think that was a concerning part. And going into this third bye, I mean, what can you do? I think you mentioned in your blog as well, just helping out the tackles, figuring out ways to use tight ends or running backs and pass protection a little bit more. I mean, that's an element to it.
Got to do it.
Yeah.
I think like they got to do it. I mean, I never coached a down of football in my life, but that's just not rocket science. That's your tackle keeps getting beat both sides repeatedly. There's the and it you know, it doesn't fix everything, but my goodness, I bet Jalen Daniels would agree with it. I mean, my God.
That's the key. There's not a magic fix. There's not going to be moving a person around and saying, hey, this is going to fix the entire offensive line. There's ways to maybe move it around and say this is the best version of it, which I thought maybe that was what we were going to see earlier in the season. Maybe you get Earl Bostic moving over to left tackle and there would have been a switch like that because I think he played 10 snaps in that maybe Oklahoma State game or one of the games earlier in the year. And I thought, hey, maybe he'll slide over left tackle and that will make things a little bit better. And then he had one of his worst games against Oklahoma. So I don't think there is some sort of magic fix by moving player around. It is, maybe just helping out a little bit in pass protection and hoping you can have a competent line over the last 3 games.
Yeah, that's fair. I think so. Benton, what other issues coming out of this thing are, there's 3 games left. There will be no more buys unless COVID decides there are. But what are you going to look for this team for the final 3 games? It doesn't matter. They're not going to win the games, and it has nothing to do with 2020 right now, right? I mean, this is all – is that your focus? I mean, just like completely evaluate this thing based on, are they gaining anything for the future in these final 3 games? Is that the number one focus right now, or should it be?
Yeah, I mean, it almost has to be because, you're 0-7 at this point, and you've got 3 games left, and no matter what kind of team you are, you always want to end the season with some type of momentum. I mean, whether you're having that momentum heading into a bowl or you're having that momentum just into a long off season as you're preparing for the next one. I mean, you got to have something positive. And I mean, there's been nothing positive this year. So no matter what Les Miles tries to tell us so far, it's not been positive. There's the defense has had its issues. The offense, obviously, it's been terrible. I was going through some numbers today for a story I was working on about just how bad the offense has been. And I kind of had forgotten that they basically went like 4 games without a passing touchdown. Like that game at West Virginia, Miles Kendrick hit Andrew Parchment. I think it was like 9 minutes left in the first quarter. Their next passing touchdown was on the final play of the game at Oklahoma. Miles Kendrick to Will Huggins.
Wow.
So, yeah. I mean, and it comes down to the O-line. The O-line is,
you don't have time.
Yeah. And I mean, I think Shane pointed this out recently too. Sometimes sacks are more of an indicator of how a quarterback is playing than an O-line. But we obviously have all seen this O-line struggle in multiple facets throughout the season. So, I mean, when you have young guys and inexperienced guys at quarterback, which, I mean, Miles Kendrick is basically inexperienced, even though he's older than Jalen Daniels. And then you have an offensive line that is just struggling. I mean, what can you do? And like Tate, like you mentioned, there's maybe some schematic things that they could do. And it's, I don't know, I get why fans get fed up with, kind of watching in, and why some of them have elected to join the Rake the Leaves campaign.
Love it. Well, yeah, it'll be interesting. I mean, it's always interesting. I think that's been the theme of this last decade, right? That they're not just bad, they're historically bad, and that makes it interesting and keeps it interesting. And if you were just covering like a 3-9 team or a 4-10 team or 4-8 team, I guess it would be. Math's not my strong suit. Then, it's less questions, less outrage, less interest because they're just bad. But when you're looking at this team where they need improvement pretty much every position, every place, across the board, every week, then there's a lot to dive into and a lot to break down. So the next 3 games will be interesting, if nothing else, because as Shane mentioned, you might learn some things, even if you go into a game thinking you're not going to learn anything. So I like how you put that. But anyway, yeah, KU will jump back in next weekend, November 21st, home against Texas, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then they go home against TCU,
and then they go to Texas Tech. So that's your one, like, if you're desperate for that win, that Texas Tech game is kind of your last hope.
Oh, you mean the guys that you beat last year that are probably still upset about that? That aren't going to lose to you 2 years in a row? Yeah, that'll be interesting. But anyway, yeah, a few games left to kind of find out where they're at heading into year 3. And I think year 3 will be obviously so pivotal in so many ways. So let's shift gears, because I think I started this podcast by saying we're going to talk almost all basketball, and then we didn't. So let's do it. We talked to Coach Self and a couple players on Thursday, and a couple things came up that were interesting. Definitely some scoring discussions, right? He mentioned Tyon Grant Foster, the JUCO transfer, had a day in practice where he was just on fire and got on a roll that Self said he hadn't seen in years, maybe. And that's interesting for sure. And then in the same breath, basically said that David McCormick's been their best scorer and been maybe their best performer overall throughout the preseason. So there's two guys that are going to have a pretty important role on this team. But I want to talk scoring. You know, that doesn't – those two guys you don't mention Ochai Agbaji. You don't mention Marcus Garrett. You don't mention Christian Brown. I mean, Benton, I know we talked about this last week, but beyond balance, I mean, just how many weapons does this team have and how much interest will that bring in following this program? Because it seems like one of those teams that you could have a different guy lead you in scoring for 6 straight games or something.
Yeah, I mean, I think that might be a strength of this team this year is that, you know, if you can kind of exploit matchups, you know, Self's pretty smart with that type of thing, kind of seeking out areas where they know they have an advantage and kind of going to that, you know. And I mean, it might be Marcus Garrett one game, even though he's not like a scoring threat, or, you know, it may be McCormick the next night. And that, I thought that was interesting too, that he kind of pointed out how good that Tyon was at practice. I guess it would have been Wednesday, right?
Yeah,
that
right.
He just was, nobody could stop him. He just kept scoring and scoring. And I'm excited to watch him play and kind of see what type of scorer he is, because people, even his teammates, had kind of a hard time coming up with comps for him, right? Just, he's so unique. He's lanky, apparently can just, you know, kind of find little lanes to get past somebody. And I guess maybe he's long enough to hit a lot of contested shots. Was it Tihan that said, you know, it seems like the better you guard him, the more likely he is to hit the shot.
Yeah. That was incredible. And, you know, I mean, this is an awful comparison, and I hate to say it, but the guy it sounded like they were describing was Kevin Durant, right? I mean, like, and I'm not saying he's anywhere near that good, but that type of scorer that just – I mean, Durant's that way. He could have 3 pests at his waist, and he doesn't care. He's just going to raise up and knock the shot down. So, you know, I don't like doing those comparisons, because now, you know, people will remember that and think that that's what they're getting. That's not what they're getting, but that type of player could very much be what they're getting. And that's Tihan said it, man. He said, I haven't seen anything like him in my time with Coach Self, and that would make sense, right? KU has not had a Kevin Durant type of player. You know, they've had plenty of talented dudes and a lot of good scorers. But, man, I think the thing that keeps bringing Durant to my mind is just that length and the ability to shoot anywhere with anyone on him and the comfort in doing so, right? And you know,
we should probably point out that he's not 7 feet tall like KD.
Oh, that's probably true. Yeah, that's probably important. But in a relative sense, he's the 6'7" JUCO Kevin Durant. Everybody good with that? No, I agree. And yeah, I'm gonna stop talking about that now before I get pegged as the guy that said that, because I've already said it once or 3 times. But I think that's, you know, the unique variety, the unique style that he brings, not only will make him a weapon, but I think makes this offense more dangerous, because that's a guy that even when your offense doesn't run well, and even if, you know, signals get crossed or spacing's bad or whatever, late in the clock, he can just, well, where am I? Okay, I'll just jump here and shoot it. And sometimes that might be a good shot for him. So I think that's going to help their team a lot. Now, it's worth pointing out, right, that Self said he's got to get more consistent. There's a really good version of Tyon, like they saw the other day. And then I think Self said these words, there's the polar opposite of that too. And you know, that's what you're going to get with shooters. You're going to get guys that, you know, go 11 for 12 one game and then 3 for 15 another. And so I think they're working on consistency right now. Shane, what'd you hear about McCormick that was interesting? I mean, I think we talked about this a little last podcast, but I mean, just by virtue of his position, he's going to have opportunities to score, but it sounds like they're expecting even more than that.
Yeah, I would say that's probably the thing that stood out to me is, I mean, last week we were discussing just based off this offense, he was probably going to be, hey, maybe the ball's going to go through him, but not necessarily means he's going to score. Right. But Self mentioned that, hey, his growth as a scorer is what kind of stood out to him as well. And I know Dave McCormick got some preseason hype last year as well, but it sounds like it's a little bit different this year in terms of just from a scoring aspect. So I think that is the thing that stood out to me. Obviously, he said that he still does it in similar ways than he's done in the past, with it being on the block or maybe shooting as well. But I don't know. I think that is the thing that stood out to me as well, is that Dave McCormick's growth as a scorer is something that Self's excited about entering the year.
Yeah, what did Lightfoot say? I mean, he said you got used to seeing Udoka with jump hooks and short shots in the lane, and he said, but you haven't seen what Dave's going to do yet. I don't exactly remember, but I mean, sounded like mid-range jumpers even, right? Did you guys hear that?
David McCormick is basically a 1990s power forward, so that would not surprise me at all if we're starting to see some more mid-range jumpers. But right. I mean, I think he probably said that because like Udoka, you kind of know where he's going to score from, right?
Yeah.
Udoka's going to score on the post, or he's going to get it off an offensive rebound, or he's going to go up and get it off a lob.
Yep.
And that's where McCormick will be different, in that he actually has a little bit of touch and can play a little bit further out facing up. I'm interested to see how much he's improved with his face-up game. And is he able to come through and make some moves and not turn the ball over and come up with an effective shot instead of just settling for 12-foot jump shots or 18-foot jump shots, right?
That's a great point. Yeah, I think he's shown that he's not shy about shooting that shot.
Mm-hmm.
But I think this year what will be so important for him and for this team is, does he shoot it at the right time? And I don't know the answer to that. That's a coach self answer. And maybe 5 seconds into the shot clock, first pass, maybe that is the right time, the way they want to play offensively. But I think that'll be a sign of maturity and just development, like you're talking about. How often he settles for that shot's a great way to put it. So who else are you guys looking at scoring wise? I mean, I still think there's a great chance that Marcus Garrett's going to be this team's leading scorer. I still think that he's their best all-around player, no question in my mind. I think he's going to be the Big 12 Player of the Year. And it's not because he doesn't have competition. There's some really good players in this league. I just think Marcus Garrett's. I think he's got a whole different world that he's going to unleash this year and be able to show, because he's no longer just the team role player. I'll fill whatever you need and I'll do it well and be that guy. He's now the guy, and it's his team, and he's got a lot of talent around him too. But I think he's got a chance to, I think he could live at the free throw line. I think he could get to the rim just like he's shown in the last couple of years, as well as or better than most. And if you can do those two things, you don't have to be a great shooter. I don't think that anybody's going to expect him to knock down 3-point shots left and right, but he can do that too. I mean, he had 6 in a game last year, right? I mean, it's not out of the question for him. So I like Marcus Garrett as a real option to lead this team in scoring. Shane, I mean, anybody else that you think has a legitimate chance to maybe be in the mix up there?
Marcus Garrett definitely would have been my pick. So sorry, I didn't mean to copy you.
No, that's good.
It does feel like, we've seen enough KU players in the past have that kind of senior year jump where they kind of really embrace it being their team. And I just feel like you're going to see different Marcus Garrett this year. And maybe there's more design ways of getting him to the rim and stuff like that, similar to what we saw maybe from Frank Mason's senior year in that sense. So, no, Marcus Garrett would be my pick for leading scorer. It's obviously not like a super confident pick because we have spoke about the balance of this team.
Right.
But, I mean, you mentioned in your story that Self had talked about how 4 people had kind of separated themselves just in this team in general. So of those 4, I mean, the next person would probably be Christian Brown. I mean, the way he obviously can stretch the floor, I think he'd be someone in the mix as well.
Yeah, and he's fearless and he's experienced now and he's gotten better, it sounds like. I mean, it's hard for me to see him leading the team in scoring, but I definitely think he could lead them in 3-point shooting, which Benton's written about and I've written about. And I mean, if you're the team's leading 3-point shooter, you're going to be in the mix maybe. I mean, if he could make 3 a game, that'd be a pretty remarkable run. And all of a sudden, you're at double digits almost right there. And he's going to get transition buckets, and he can get to the line, and he attacks the rim. He's fearless. I think, Benton, we haven't seen Bryce Thompson play, but that's another guy that I think maybe nationally, you read all these too early top 25s and things like that. And KU's been ranked consistently in the top 8 of all of those at all of those outlets. And they're, of course, they're 6th in the AP poll, but that's a name that almost always comes up in those little blurbs about why KU's ranked here. And they say, that he's a step in right away and score guy. And I definitely think he's that type of player. I just don't know if he'll do it this year.
Yeah, I mean, he's not like crazy athletic, right? And when you're a freshman and you're not maybe, you're not at your peak physically where you might be in a couple of years just because you haven't spent enough time in the weight room and that type of thing. Not to say that he hasn't, set himself up to succeed, but just like the older you get, and the more, and once you get to KU, you have so many more opportunities to really become a stronger player with their strength and conditioning program. So
For sure.
I just don't know, as a true freshman at his size, will he, put up a ton of points? I think that he could be that guy next year, maybe.
Yeah.
But I also do think he will score, but I think he's in a pretty good situation where had he gone somewhere else, he might have had to be the guy. And now you're asking a lot of a true freshman who's, even though he is confident, it takes some reps at the college level to be able to just go and get your shot. Not too many guys can do that, and there's a reason for it. It's difficult to do. So I think he will be. I wouldn't be surprised at all if he averages like 8 or 9 points a game. And the good news is for KU is they don't need him probably to do.
Yeah, that could be their 6th or 7th score.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, exactly. I do think it will be that kind of diverse in how they're scoring. I really think they could have 6 or 7 guys averaging 7 or more points, and maybe McCormick leads the team at 14 or 15 a game at most.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, I just don't see McCormick scoring much more than that. I could be way off the way Self's talked about him, but I just think that,
man. I mean, the Bill doesn't have many 20-point scorers in his 18 years, so that's a lot. That's a lot. And I love what you said about Bryce. I mean, I think that the cool thing about Bryce too is, he did it all in Oklahoma in Tulsa, when he was a high school star and a 5-star prospect, and now he comes up here and he comes to this team that's just loaded with weapons. I mean, I could see, even as good as Marcus Garrett is, and even though Marcus Garrett's the true point guard and going to run the show, I could see Bryce Thompson leading this team in assists this year. I mean, he's a heady player, and I don't think – I wrote this in my he will, he won't, he might blog. He's not going to be the kind of guy that demands a bunch of shots. It's not like that's his game or that's how he wants to play. He wants to be on the best team, and he wants to play the best role he can. And for this team, that absolutely could be him just using his intelligence to set guys up, and there are a lot of options to set up. So, I think he's so smart basketball wise and otherwise that I think that he's the type of kid that could come in and say, I could shoot this, but McCormick's right there. I think the smart move would be to get it to him, and then we get guaranteed 2 points, or reverse the ball to a wide open Christian Braun who can knock down that 3, and I don't have to force my shot. I mean, I just think that's how he plays. I think he's so smart, and so I don't like him in the conversation for leading scorer at all. But I do think you're right. I think he'll play a ton. I think he'll score. 8 or 9 points a game is a great guess, and he'll have a role. He'll be a factor. But yeah, we haven't talked about Ochai at all. And I think people
I was just thinking about that.
Yeah, right. People were, at least some people, and I don't remember if I was one of them or not, but some people were talking about Ochai as potentially leading the team in scoring last year and going into the season. And obviously that didn't happen, nor did it need to. I mean, he found his role and played it perfectly and let the two-headed monster of Doak and Dotson do their thing. But Ochai has some ability, man, and he can score in a lot of different ways too. He's got a lot of transition opportunities. He's got a three-point shot that continues to improve from what we hear. I think the biggest thing I'd like to see from him is just get to the free throw line more. And maybe we will see that. But what are you guys looking for from him? I mean, he's a junior now.
I think he's in a much better spot this year, just because, like, I as you kind of alluded to, I think maybe people were expecting too much from him last year. And now he's on this team that really does seem to be kind of a team first approach and have nice balance, where nobody's going to be saying, man, Ochai, we need 18 to 20 points from you, or, we're in trouble. I mean, it really does seem like he can just kind of fit in, and, he's smart. He knows what good shots are and what they aren't. And if he's not feeling pressured, like, oh, I've got to be this guy to come out and produce, I think it's going to be easier for him to just kind of get shots within the flow of the offense, off of a Marcus Garrett drive and kick, or in transition, as you mentioned. I mean, who on this team can get out in transition and finish better off a lob than Ochai can, right?
Should be him. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
So, I mean, there's going to be opportunities. And I think that will be one of the more interesting things to track this year is just how balanced it ends up being. And, is it truly a game where do you go like 7 games in a row where there's a different leading score each game, something like that. And we should probably get into this at some point. Hopefully you can play 7 games in a row without the pandemic and outbreaks kind of affecting what you're trying to do.
Yeah, that's a good point. We got about, I don't know, 7 or 8 minutes left, so we can jump in on that and then get out of here. But I think that's very, very important to talk about. And Self was asked this week if he's concerned as COVID cases continue to rise around the country and numbers are getting hot everywhere you look and things like that. He was asked yesterday or on Thursday if he was concerned about that. And he said, I am concerned. I'm concerned a lot. And you don't get Self to say things like that unless he means it. Right. And so I think the concern is very legitimate. I think it's something they're feeling every day. We saw this week that the Ivy League, which really the Ivy League was the thing that set it off, canceling their postseason tournament. They were the first one to do that back in March, and then the dominoes fell after that. And I'm not saying that's going to happen here, but the Ivy League this week decided to cancel winter sports, and that opened your eyes, man. And I think that the difference between that and the rest of college athletics is that the Ivy League is not financially benefiting as much from athletics as the rest of these conferences are, right, with television deals and things like that. So that doesn't mean everybody's doomed by any means, but you'd sure rather not see anybody having to do that or wanting to do that. And so I think that's something to keep an eye on for sure. You continue to see these stories from national writers that talk to coaches or ADs, anonymously that say, I don't think we should play a non-conference schedule. And there's a lot of that sentiment out there. And so it's, we're inside of 2 weeks now from KU's first game, which is supposed to be down in Fort Myers. And that's the schedule. That's the plan. And until we hear otherwise, that's what we'll prepare for and expect. But it would not surprise me at all if they're not able to play all of their non-conference games. And that could be because of something that happens COVID-wise, numbers-wise, could happen with KU, could happen with the program they're trying to play. I mean, there's just, as Self said yesterday, there's so many things out of your control that just make it hard. But it'd be weird. I mean, it'd be weird because they spent so much time and so much effort rebuilding that schedule and then announcing it, and then if you don't get it all in. But I think he's right to expect that and for people to kind of prepare for this is going to be a weird season. And anybody that thinks they're just going to line them up and play with games 1 through 27 as scheduled in a row like they are, I'd be shocked if that happens. You agree? I mean, is that you guys on that same page?
Yeah, I think so. I just think because there's you're playing so many games. With football, there's kind of like, in the Big 12 you have 10 games, so you have just 10 chances, and there's so many numbers, right, that you can have smaller outbreaks and still play.
Right.
Whereas I feel like with basketball, and if you have, I mean, obviously the rosters are much smaller, but I feel like there's probably more contact tracing situations, if that makes sense. Like, I feel like there's more guys like in the same spots with a basketball team, whereas a football roster, you're kind of all over the place.
Sure.
So, and that's, I've put no research into that. That's just like my general kind of assessment of how it might work. And
let's pass the mic to Shane. He does research. What do you got for us, Shane?
Yeah.
Trump Benton's research.
Enlighten us.
I just think it would be kind of naive to think that KU is going to play every single basketball game this year.
Right.
I mean, football's proven that it's going to be a mess. But there's a way to get through it, obviously. And this is going to be indoors now, and you have less players, so that if there's a slight outbreak, then you're probably not playing the game. So it is going to be a mess. But I mean, football's proven somewhat that you can get through it. So I think there's still going to be a season. It's just probably not every single game.
Well, yeah, I read the other day, I think it was Jeff Goodman wrote this too. Like, he's the first one that I've seen point out, what about officials? I mean, it's not just keeping players safe. It's these officials that work with different crews and work in this conference and then go work in that conference and, bounce all over the country. I mean, boy, those guys have a lot of pressure. You could have two teams. You could have Kansas and Kentucky in Indianapolis ready to go for the Champions Classic on December 1st, and you could find out the night before that the officiating crew's not able to do it. And do you have time to get another crew in there, or do you have to cancel that game? I mean, there's so, like Self said, so many things that are out of the control of these coaches and programs. And man, it's just do the best you can, stay as safe as possible. KU sounds like they're doing that. I mean, I was blown away when Self said they don't even those players don't even leave their dorm to get food. I mean, like, they bring it to them. So they're obviously wearing masks in the locker room and, you know, sitting 6 feet apart there and all that. I mean, these guys want to play and they'll do whatever they can, because I think that March cancellation is still so fresh in everybody's minds. Nobody wants to go through that again. But yeah, you said it, Shane. I mean, naive to think they're going to play all 27 of them. I think the focus has to be, again, stay as safe as you can, do all you can to get as many games as you can in. But the whole thing, from an NCAA level down to a conference level down to a school level, the whole thing should be designed on, let's make sure we can play the tournament in March, whatever that means. And if your number one overall seed in March is 14-1, so be it. I mean, you know, let's get that bubble situation figured out for March, have the tournament, let that money be made, let those fans enjoy it, even if they don't attend. And that should be the focus of college basketball right now. And probably on a lot of levels is. So any final thoughts? We got 2 minutes on the clock.
Yeah. I mean, just you bringing up March Madness. I mean, I think you're exactly right. Like, that's the goal line. That's what they have to get to, because I mean, obviously it's also like huge for the budgets of so many of these programs, athletic departments throughout the country. You know, March Madness makes a ton of money for these schools. So I mean, that's incentive too. I mean, because we've seen at KU the type of cuts they've had to make and kind of how they're expecting to operate with the budget, you know, way under what it normally would be. So I mean, you've got to find ways to kind of make it as good as you possibly can.
Perfectly said. We'll end it right there, and we will be there all along the way to cover this thing, whatever it looks like and however it plays out. For Shane Jackson and Benton Smith, I'm Matt Tate. Thanks for checking out the KU Sports Hour. We'll have lots of KU basketball coverage and, of course, KU Texas next week. So check us out next week. And thanks for checking out this episode. Take care of yourselves, everyone.